All righty. So, welcome to the Modern Mythology Podcast YouTube channel. This channel, if you are unfamiliar, is really more just a supplement to the podcast. The podcast was where the real action happens. This is really just me trying to, sometimes there's some visual things, sometimes there's supplementary material that we want to talk about. And this is a good venue outside the podcast to do so. We're huge fans of cyberpunk games, and we wanted to bring to you what we're playing this Thursday. Now, keep in mind the podcast itself probably isn't going to air for a couple months because we're recording ahead of time, but we'll still be in the sci-fi phase, which we're only just publishing now. But let's get started. So this is very exciting. This is a game called Cyber Plus Punk, and this is a forged in the dark game. So it's based off Blades in the Dark, and everything you need to know is right there. We have one last job for you, runner, one last chance to clear off your debt. So this is really about one shots, and that becomes a really important aspect of this game because uh, unlike Blades, there are no rules basically for the crew or for your setting or for how your crew advances or anything to that effect. So this is about this one run. You can see the difference here. You have these multicolored bifolds. I love this design, by the way, these solid yellow. We're going to do the frameworks, which are these here. We're going to do those separately in another video later on. They're not really super important right now. We're going to instead focus on these pieces. Now, you're going to notice, first off, that all of these are actually just character sheets, right? So these are 5 character sheets and the rules. Yep, you heard me correctly. There are the rules. Blades is for a small book is a pretty hefty read. And it covers a lot, and it's fantastic. I'd have to sort of like do a little bit more looking into it, but I would say at least half of that book is setting material, right? But in this is solely about the run and your characters in the run. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this to the side for a second, and we're going to talk about this. So this is your character sheet as well as the rules of the game, almost in their entirety, or at least the player's version of the rules. I absolutely love this stuff. Love using grease pencils or dry erase markers to mark this up. I love that there's 5 character sheets. There's so much information that is being distributed to you in such a small package. Now, let's focus on this here. I'm such a sucker for what are we doing in this game? Embrace the cyberpunk life, go into danger, right? Chase after conflict, right? That's what that's saying. Use your stress, push, assist, or resist. Act now, plan with flashbacks later on. Build your character through play. Ask questions when in doubt. Take responsibility as co author of the game. I love that. And then play to find out what happens, which is a big credo of Apocalypse World that ilk. The rest of this is how to make a character. Really pretty simple. Come up with a name, come up with your look. You risk it all for a reason. It's called your angle. You choose one of the available angles, get out make them pay, look after them, upgrade life, learn the truth, take a stand, upgrade life. That sounds like something I'd be really into. You assign +2, +1, and +1 in any order to your 3 of your 4 approaches. There's only 4 approaches in this. Distribute 8 dice over your skills. We'll talk about expertise in a bit. It gives you a little bit about body modifications and picking a signature one. And then don't pick your gear because we're going to use it for a loadout, which again, should be pretty aware of if you know anything about blades, which we'll cover now. Um, the rules are a little bit different for this game. So what you can see here is that you have 4 approaches: aggressive, smart, empathetic, and stealthy. You can have up to 2 dice in each. And we also could tell that you have something called glitches. And this, just so you know, we'll look at it later. Glitches are kind of like trauma in blades. The rules are just this one panel here. Describe what you want to accomplish with your approach, skill, and other factors. GM assesses a threat level and an effect level. Again, this is really described in a very concise manner. And while I think at first this can be really opaque, when you dig into it, you really do understand how elegant this idea is, right? We'll talk about threat and effect when we talk about the GM. You can raise both threat and effect together to improve your effect at the cost of worsening consequence, or vice versa. That's wonderful. Finally, gather your dice. You're rolling a number of dice. However many dice you use, you pick the best one. And then this has this very easy little flow chart. We should be pretty familiar with this flow chart. Double sixes is a critical, you increase your effect. 6 is just an effect, you do what's intended. 4 and 5 is a partial, it's a success, but with a consequence. And 1 to 3 is a failure, things go bad and you fail and also get a consequence. You also have glitches, which we talked about just a little bit ago. Each glitch factor used is an action roll. You get a glitch die on a 1 to 3. It's a level 2 consequence on top of everything else that can't be resisted, right? I think that's a really interesting perspective because I don't know. I think consequences are some of the most interesting aspects of games like this, and something that's severely missing in most traditional games. And so this is but sometimes mitigating consequences in like the Mist Engine or Blades can feel a little deflating. Like, nope, I don't want to do this cool thing. I'm just going to take stress instead. Is it just doesn't fall right with me. I don't know. It's just some of my friends, sort of laugh at me because they think, oh, you just want to kind of screw us over. I don't know. That could be true. Well, we'll see. A 4 to 5 is additional consequence that can be resisted normally, but obviously, if you roll a 6, clearly nothing happens. I like this kind of game design. I like the idea that we don't have to say nothing happens if you roll a 6 because there's nothing here that says anything happens when you roll a 6. I don't know. I kind of dig that stuff. Some people are kind of completionist, but I like the elegance of that. Um, you have your standard skills for Cyberpunk Analyze. The nice thing is, in each of these, not only can you have 1 or 2 dots, 1 or 2 dice for these, but it gives you like a little sense of, oh, analyzes people, situations, or information. Coding is hacking, compiling, mining, or scramble. Range combat, pistol, rifle, or SMG. Sciences, biotech, physics, or chemistry. It's really focused on, hey, these are the important things to this setting: analyze athletics, close combat coding, influence piloting, range combat rigging, sciences, streetwise, and attune. And attune is weird. Attune is a little nod to the possibility of some supernatural strangeness. There's a thing called expertises where you can swap out a plus one of these dice for an edge. And so we'll talk about what an edge is in a little bit. So that's really the core of everything that's going on. This piece here is really just the more cyberpunky stuff. So augmentation, you're just basically writing what your augments are. You start with a special one. Um, Mark special resistance to wield it against a fitting type of consequence. So you can say whatever you decide, and it is very interesting to say, hey, by the way, we want you to mention a brand. So you want a brand and the type, give an idea what it could do. These things can glitch also as consequences. And you can have up to three of them, although you only start with one. You will talk about how you get other ones later on. Light gear, again, very streamlined. Light load, medium load, heavy load. It says how many items you get to do. It gives you a sense of what that means in the fiction. Move freely, blend in easily, look ready for a job, or loud and slow, very conspicuous. If we were to obviously have heat values, heavy would lead into it. And I think the lack of heat to me and the lack of downtime and entanglements is such a fun aspect of the game. But again, if you're just looking at one shots, what do you need it for, right? um, I also like that idea because I'm wondering if it makes players push harder. Thursday, we're going to find out, right? And then here's your gear. You have armor, SMGs, drones, demolition tools, med kits, disguise gear. Gear and augmentations are mid grade by default. When comparing gear between opposing sides, the highest grade model has edge. And then, of course, you can upgrade with flashbacks. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then finally, on this, you have stress, just like you do in Blades. I love the little symbology going on, little pluses. In fact, um, it shows right here what those symbols mean. So you have add a die, effect, stress, remove a die, and threat, and then increase and reduce. And so I recall seeing one thing in here, right here. So for a critical, it'll say, I was like, what does triangle E mean, right? And obviously that says increase effect. Instead of writing out increase effect, I don't know. I just dig that stuff. So overload, when you mark your last stress, an approach of your choosing becomes permanently glitched. So that's where these little glitches happen. You can see it says hesitation, disorientation, apathy, and reckless. So they just do such a good job in being evocative, just a good job in saying, look, we're going to give you what you need to color this. And I think that really helps in, tyranny of the blank page. Very, very important. Immediately occurs a complication, such as you're taken out, expose the team's weakness, you make the team lose an advantage, you damage or overlook something crucial. And of course, I think these are this is such as, right? So I do love the idea that, of course, the GM can come up with some other ideas. While overloaded, you can't perform actions that require stress, and you take a breather to take away stress. Resistances. This is a really different perspective. First off, I know it says it in Blades, but it doesn't really come across in Blades as much as it does where it says reduce the severity of a consequence. Or if the GM says it's okay, eliminate it entirely, right? And I think that's like an important thing. I think because mitigation, again, as I said, to me is like such a meh thing, and I like the idea of like reducing the severity of a consequence in a resistance roll. They focus mostly on armor, but really it could be anything. And what you do is roll an appropriate approach based on, how you're resisting. So you don't have separate resistance rolls compared to your approaches. And don't add dice or add skill at this time if you opt to deplete a relevant gear. Plus, and then it's you have its own little chart compared to the main chart. which I really like. Um, when they say armor, they are talking about physical armor, but then, the idea being like, hey, describe what you resisting this looks like. They have harm, pretty standard harm. Four, right? You have four levels of harm. Consequently, you also have four levels of threat. So, your standard threat is two. So, by and large, in this game, you're going to be taking two levels of harm, and if you increase that, if you're using stress to increase that threat level to three, like that's no joke. That's really no joke. And then four, you're putting life on the line. I just really, really, really love that. All right. They talk about some special actions, how pushing works, right? You can mark stress or add a glitch to either get a die or increase your effect, right? Or act when you're out. So that's a really fun one. Mark a stress to expose yourself to the consequences and add a die to a teammate's action roll. Only one teammate at a time. Setup, you can actually make an action roll to give yourself an edge for future actions or someone else's future actions. I love that. Um, the leader marks stress for each failure for lead group. So everybody can make a roll. Like, say, everybody is going through and sneaking through an area. Everybody can do it, and then you take the best result. But each player that fails, the leader gets a stress. Flashbacks. This is probably one of the strongest mechanics, something that I've always done in my games to begin with, but I love seeing this sort of stuff codified. Declare to have an action in the past to impact a current situation, right? Um, and it's one stress it costs a standard activity likely to have occurred. So you can, I always use the Ocean's 11. We don't see all of the planning that happens in Ocean's 11. We only see some of it. And you could see towards the end when we go to flashbacks that, oh, yeah, this is just describing how we did that thing, right? Or how we got out of this, or how we, whatever it was. Two is if it's an elaborate plan involving unlikely factors, right? The more you stretch, the more the game moderator gets to say, that's going to cost you two stress. Uh, Take a breather. You get an additional die if your breather has to do with your angle. You take out, learn the truth. You're focusing on upgrading life. You're looking after your fellows, and you roll 1 to 3. You can clear one stress all the way up to all of your stress. Assets and upgrades call for a flashback to establish how you acquire an asset, which is a vehicle, expert safe houses, data, augmentations. You can add a new augmentation to your list, right? I love this idea that you have a flashback to go to a Ripper Doc just before you're going to break out your mantis blades, right? We don't see them until you do that flashback. That's pretty cool. Or you can upgrade. You can upgrade from mid-level gear to mid-grade gear to high-grade gear, or add an extra feature to the gear, which is really cool. You can also, in this, which is new, reduce the flashback's cost when declaring an asset has an augmentation or upgrade, has a drawback. And here's some ideas for drawbacks: it's heavy, it's glitched, you're being hunted, or you gain more debt. And then you have some notes here. So, love this, absolutely love this. I really dig this game, and I want to play more of it. Often I don't have enough time or energy, and I'll be honest, the biggest piece of this equation to me that was a little off putting, it's not that I couldn't put some brain power to it, but it's a little off putting that there's no. There's nothing to do beyond this. You either play the same character, you could, as written, right? There's really nothing about the crew and nothing about what happens if you survive. I guess the idea that maybe your debt got cleared off. So that you can imagine is really the lion's share of this game, and then that's ostensibly how to play the game, and then this is how to run the game. We'll get into, of course, game moderator protocols, find out what happens. You also notice it's interesting that that's first here, where it's last in the players group. Telegraph trouble before it hits. So that's you can't throw like a huge consequence at somebody without telling them that it's coming. Follow through with establishing threats. So don't pull punches, but make sure everybody understands what's going on in the fiction. You'll also note that my co-host and I talk about that in terms of you know secrets and that Hitchcockian idea of thrills versus uh, thrills versus I forget the word. I'm sorry. You know what I'm talking about. Any questions? Set the stage to encourage players to express their characters. So give characters opportunities to be cool. Provide context. Convey a vibrant world of high tech and low life around the player characters. Present interesting situations. Build upon their choices. And cut to the action. And this is going to be critical. And when we do the actual play, you're going to see this. Is something I love, is something what I do in Otherscape. Fuck all this other stuff. Get to the action, start what's going on, and flashback for any other pertinent information that you need. Um, so let's see. It tells you what you need here. Revolves around a character's last run in a high stakes operation with a clear objective, best suited for veteran runners. As a GM, you can prepare to run outlines in advance or generate them to the spot. Using the prompts found in the frameworks brochure, which we talked about. When I run this, I'm totally going to do it off the cuff. We're all going to choose a framework by ourselves, like at the table. Is using the PC's angles and the eventual hunted statuses. So I'm going to make basically like one page of notes, which we'll talk about that later on. After selecting the run, ask the players to file their runners, build their characters. I think this is an important piece of the equation. They're not making characters until they know what the run is. This is often something I employ. It's really subtle, but I want to talk about how critical this is and how I use this for things like beliefs and goals. Any game, which nowadays is almost every game that has those, I make certain that the players know what's at the table, what's happening, what their group idea or goal or objective is before they start talking to their own. Because I love the idea that they get to then choose to go along or push or do something tangential. Um, it also says on your end, write a couple of locations, which I have some ideas. Potential assets, make a list with 3 to 6 obstacles that they may encounter, but don't over prepare. This is a type of game where you play to find out what happens. I love that. I absolutely love that. We're going to talk about that little phrase right there, right? Play to find out what happens. We're going to talk about that in a podcast at some point in time because there's a lot of phrases that people throw around, and obviously there are things that we think are cool and not cool, or fun games or not fun games. There are certain movements involved where they have credos or manifestos, and like often there's a lot of shared content, which I find very interesting because often we see that there'll be like very different kinds of games. By the way, if you can hear it, and I don't know if you can, the there may be a soundtrack involved in this video inadvertently, provided to you by the ice cream truck outside my apartment. Anyway, um, so when everybody's ready, recap the run's objective. Let the players select their engagement plan, right? Here's the engagement plans: assault, deception, stealth, social transport. This gives a GM an idea of they're going to how they're going to approach that first scene. They select their load. Remember, that's normal, moderate, or heavy, or light, moderate, or heavy, and you get going. You describe a location and the circumstances based on the engagement plan, and then you like now engage with your first significant obstacle, right? A shootout, a chase, a checkpoint, possibly leading to action rolls, which we know how they work. Um, build up on their actions as they get closer to the objective. You should have enough to put them on the spot, reveal a twist, possibly challenge the PC's priorities, interests as they're moving forward. So this specifically says, I think this is part of the genre, right? How is this different? And maybe make a little note. What happens? Who screws them over? How? But it doesn't have to be that one thing, right? This is some ideas. They were stealing from the first known awakened AI. Rogue and synthetics show empathy towards them. Maybe the target are good guys. The gig's client is revealed to be runner's common enemy. Some shady organization is interested in the target. Maybe there's other runners involved in it. Maybe there are deeper consequences and bad side effects to a piece of tech that they're trying to acquire, that kind of stuff. Very, very standard trope in cyberpunk. And they're saying, hey, lean into that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the consequence mechanic, right? Final obstacle could be a resourceful individual, resilient machine, or a difficult choice. When the run's objective is concluded, successful or not, wrap it up and then log off. Runners have received their reward or bad news if they failed, and now we see how they leverage it in a score in their angle. The outcome of their epilogue is determined by an angle roll. So at the end of this, and so there's basically like a little epilogue. I really love this. I think not enough games focus on a denouement. And as we talk in the podcast about meeting, system to story, this stuff is really important. And I think a lot of people are like, we're just going to play and we're just going to roll dice. We're just going to see what happens. But I think you're missing a lot of richness when you fail to understand what the resolution of certain things are. Um, so that's what's going on there. It talks a little bit about Forged in the Dark. Player characters are runners, mercs doing their last run. The sprawl is an overcrowded megacity consumed by high tech class struggle, intrusive advertising, corporatocracy, automated services. The grid is made of several servers, and certain rich people have their own servers. And the game moderator refers to the game rules to establish a dynamic world, right? What kind of dice? 2 to 4 hours, 2 to 5 players. Talks about sensitive topics like racial stigma, class segregation, large scale disaster, violence, blah, 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 especially violence, right? Hey, it's intended for mature players and with mutual trust and safety tools in place. Very, very important. I'm going to say this when we do the actual play. However, I want to point out that we always have safety tools in place, even though our little vignettes, our little actual plays don't often focus on those. And we might do that in this one. I don't know. We'll see what's going on. And if you open it up, it gives you really more of the same. Player character faces a risky or troublesome situation, make an action roll. Player describes the exact same run of what's going on here. Threat, effect, and edge, right? So threat levels informs the danger imposed on the situation from 1 to 4. Effect level gauges how much is accomplished on the success. They're both set to level 2 as standard. This is really, I felt, a less than intuitive piece of Blades. And I honestly feel like this is the same thing, but they really describe it in a much more succinct way. So kudos to the designer. In a conflict, each may have an edge. And if they do, using gear, tactics, environment, opposition, weaknesses to their advantage, only the most significant factors should be considered. Edges can increase or reduce either threat level or edge. If the runner has an edge, it can void or mitigate, retaliate from the threat, reduce threat. An edge that increases their effectiveness increases effect. Um, Using an expertise, you could trade in a die for an edge, and you could choose to push yourself for an increased effect. Um, so that's really pretty cool. Consequences talks about consequences inflicted by enemy actions, bad circumstances, the outcome of a roll. Threat informs a harm level up to 4. Reduced effect or action. These are some options, right? Reduced effect, their action fails short, causes less effect. So your threat level could conceivably just reduce effect, probably almost always the least interesting. But sometimes it's good to just be like, uh, really dramatic. I come down with my, vibro axe, and the effect is the cyber samurai pulls his katana, in one fell swoop and knocks your sword and then takes a stance, right? That kind of stuff. Harm, obvious. Complications, compromise assets, glitching, remove ammo, start your advanced troublesome progress tracks. We absolutely love clocks here. Threat escalation, you choose to control the situation, take away an edge or safeguard to higher threat. So you can remove edges. Lost opportunity. Lost opportunity usually means the scene has to move forward. Something happens, an enemy leaves. Maybe they run off with the MacGuffin or whatever the case is. Combine these as the fiction dictates. Runners can resist each consequence separately. Each harm level implies a penalty to pertinent actions, which we saw in the character sheet. We can see that the penalties are here: decreased effect, for harm, right? So if you're starting at 2 and you have 1 level harm, you're starting at effect level 1. Minus of a die, you're taken out of the situation and you perish. Make a new character. Luckily, making characters in this is actually really easy. I really, let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Obviously, level 4 is, all right, progress tracks. We know how progress tracks work, right? Um, when a PC makes progress towards an objective, tick a number of segments equal to the effect. When progress is made by an opposition, tick a number of segments equal to threat. So, I think this is an important idea, particularly in here where they say this represents a race. File decryption versus file system wipe. You shouldn't ever have them be the same track. You shouldn't. Um, and this, you could see what happens is you're like, all right, well, we're working towards a breach alarm, and the consequence is facility lockdown. You shouldn't allow players to reduce those, or if you do, maybe once or twice or their effects, but you don't want to like you want you want there to not be progress, not be negative progress, because it really slows down the pace of a game. This is really the best way when you have like opposing things, and you could see sometimes they can actually be different levels, right? So this is obviously saying, hey, the file decryption only takes 4, but a full system wipe is going to take 6. They could be switched. So this is the player side. This is the GM side. That's always a great way to go. Adversary skills. This is kind of a new idea that, and I think I really like it. Um, This idea that when regular adversaries are involved, the PC simultaneously, a single role tells us how their actions interact with consequences and results. That's what we normally see. Skilled adversaries are about to accomplish something. How the runners respond their roles determine how effective the adversary was. This is about taking threats to like progress charts, right? Sometimes it can be taking threats. You're rolling to stop their action, which is like actively, which is different than the last one, which is by taking initiative. When elite adversaries act, they can inflict consequences that must be resisted before the runners get a chance to act. You're going right to resistance rolls, right? So this is consequences are mutual. This is consequences are really one sided. This is consequences already happened and we're going right to the resistance roll. This is very cool, and it's actually how I generally do it. Now, I think they suggest how you do it, although not tied to regular skilled or elite, but in the mist mist engine, City of Mist, Otherscape, and so on and so forth. Glitches we talked about, angle roll. So when you go and you have that angle roll as your denouement, there's a way to go about it. We'll see what that happens at the end of our sessions. If you choose an approach, uh, you can like reduce a lot of dice for being in debt. But basically, like what you're trying to do as a player is really get that great outcome. And so you're trying to avoid these things, which I think is really, really cool because maybe you want to get rid of debt before you go into the denouement. Maybe, um, if you didn't meet, let's say the operative is what it's called, the person who's going to give you the job. Maybe the person who gives you the job says, "Hey, I want this done quiet," and then a consequence is there's an explosion. That's actually a pretty common way my normal other escape characters end all their jobs is with explosions, but whatever. I don't think that's uncommon. But in this, that actually has consequences, and I absolutely love that. And then the role is you succeed remarkably. You got out of it mostly intact. You did it, but it won't last. And then you failed. And how did your action manage to set you back even further? So that's it. That's the game, guys. Um, we're going to talk about the frameworks in another video, but I wanted to put this out there, particularly since I want my players to have access to this, my co-hosts, um, so that we can really like jump in and get started, and everybody kind of maybe has a jump on what they want to do. That's obviously very important also, not only to one shot. So hey, if you're going to run a one shot of this game, please show your players this, right? So they have an idea of what's going on. um, yeah, so that's really going on. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining the conversation.